have to make all these excuses for her. This, like I said, all this was this week was people who said, oh, she ran a flawless campaign.
Let's dive into the messy, chaotic swirl of political discourse that's been spinning around Kamala Harris's campaign and the broader Democratic strategy, or lack thereof, in the wake of the latest election cycle. The date is March 23, 2025, and the dust still hasn't settled from the electoral showdown that left the Democrats licking their wounds and pointing fingers. Bill Maher, ever the sharp-tongued provocateur, has been at the forefront of dismantling the excuses and flimsy narratives peddled by the likes of MSNBC's John Heilemann and other legacy media talking heads. What we've got here is a masterclass in exposing the disconnect between the political elite and the American electorate, and it's worth unpacking every jagged piece of it. Maher's frustration is palpable, and it's not hard to see why. The post-mortem of Harris's campaign has been drowning in a flood of tired explanations. She ran a flawless campaign, some say, while others cry sexism or racism as the culprits. Maher's not buying any of it, and neither should we. He's quick to point out that these are just pages from an old playbook, dog-eared, overused, and irrelevant to what actually happened. America, he argues, isn't inherently opposed to electing a woman. They just had no love for the last two put forward, and Harris, as Joe Biden's vice president, was saddled with a political albatross that no amount of polish could shake off. Whether she performed perfectly or stumbled, the baggage of the Biden administration was a weight she couldn't shed. She didn't make a compelling case, didn't distance herself from the policies people despised, and instead tried to coast on fumes. The result? A resounding thud at the ballot box. Maher's been vocal about this on his show, and the internet's eating it up. He's taken particular aim at MSNBC, a network he's called out for its propagandist nutcrackery. He's been on their turf, shows like Morning Joe, and found it absurd. It wasn't morning, there was no one called Joe, no one could concentrate, he quipped, torching their journalistic credibility. He's not alone in this sentiment. Russell Brand, the actor-comedian with a knack for cutting through nonsense, once echoed this, slamming MSNBC for its blatant bias and failure to champion real American heroes. For Maher, the network's latest embarrassment came when John Heilemann wandered into his crosshairs, offering up excuses for Harris that didn't survive the first round of scrutiny. Heilemann's argument was simple but shaky. Harris lost because her message didn't reach its audience. Maher wasn't having it. The problem wasn't the message's reach, it was the medium. Democrats leaned hard on legacy, outlets like MSNBC and CNN, preaching to an already converted choir, while Trump was out there hitting broader, less partisan platforms like Joe Rogan's podcast and Theo Von's show. When the legacy media strategy flopped, the Democrats didn't pivot, they doubled down, bombarding people with texts and door knocks. Tim Walz texting every 5 minutes begging for cash? Strangers knocking on doors in an age where even a phone call feels invasive? Maher nailed it. Everything the Democrats did to win voters ended up annoying them instead. It's not that Harris's message didn't land, it's that the delivery was tone-deaf and intrusive. So who got caught in Maher's crossfire this time? Heilemann, with his claim that Harris's loss stemmed from a failure to connect, tried to paint her as a victim of circumstance. Maher flipped the script, arguing it wasn't about connection, it was about substance. Americans weren't swayed by polished speeches, they were reacting to their lived reality. Inflation through the roof, crime spiking, an unsecured border, these weren't just talking points, they were daily struggles. Voters didn't need more time to get to know Harris, they knew enough and didn't like what they saw. Heilemann's insistence that 107 days wasn't enough for her to introduce herself to the country got a swift reality check from Maher. You're overestimating the American people if you think they need more than a week to figure her out. The exchange hit a peak when Maher turned to his audience, mostly left-leaning folks, and asked, "How many of you didn't know enough about Kamala Harris to decide whether to vote for her?" Silence. Not a hand raised, not a peep. It was a gut punch to Heilemann's narrative. The awkward stillness wasn't just a pause, it was a verdict. Americans weren't confused about Harris. They'd sized her up and found her wanting. Heilman fumbled, backpedaling as his argument collapsed, but the damage was done. Maher didn't just win the debate, he exposed a truth the Democrats keep dodging. Their problem isn't messaging, it's the message itself. This wasn't Harris's failure alone, though. The Democrats set her up to fail, and the roots go back to Biden. He was supposed to be a bridge to the next generation, but arrogance kept him in the race too long. After a disastrous debate, he dropped out, leaving Harris with a 3-month sprint to define herself. Some say that wasn't enough time, but Maher disagrees it was plenty. The issue wasn't the clock, it was the candidate. People met her, judged her, and moved on. A 2014 study Maher referenced drives this home. Fortune 500 companies often pick female CEOs when they're already struggling, setting them up to either shine or take the fall. That's what happened here. Biden's exit left Harris holding the bag for an administration already on the ropes, and she couldn't escape the stench. The Democrats had options too. Maher and guest Michael Douglas pointed out the party's deep bench: Adam Schiff, Wes Moore, even Gavin Newsom. Schiff won big in California, Moore's a rising star in Maryland, and Newsom's already gearing up to fight Trump's next moves. But instead of tapping merit or vision, the Democrats played identity politics. Harris, a black woman, was chosen as VP to check boxes, appealing to women and black voters in one swoop. It backfired. Politics isn't about optics, it's about competence and connection. Voters don't just want representation, they want results. By prioritizing symbolism over substance, the Democrats misread the room. Harris felt performative, not authentic, and people saw through it. Heilman tried to salvage his point, arguing that 107 days was a high degree of difficulty for anyone thrust into the top spot. He compared Harris to Trump, who'd been a known quantity for years, and Obama, who had 2 years of primaries to build his profile. Maher countered with a global perspective. Other countries run elections in weeks or months, Britain, for example, where party leaders are known long before the short campaign kicks off. Are Americans dumber than Brits? Hardly. The idea that 3 months wasn't enough to judge Harris assumes voters are clueless, and that's where Heilman lost the plot. Americans aren't slow, they're discerning. They didn't need a crash course. They'd already taken Harris's measure and found her lacking. Maher's not just picking on Harris or Heilman. He's diagnosing a broader Democratic malaise. The party's agenda, not just its candidates, failed. Inflation, crime, border chaos, these weren't abstract issues. They were daily headaches. Biden, even at peak form, would have lost, maybe worse. The message wasn't selling because it didn't match reality. Harris could have dodged this if she'd broken from the woke left, embraced common sense policies, and tackled the economy, security, and cost of living head-on. She didn't. She stuck to the script, and it sank her. Imagine a Harris who'd rejected the extreme rhetoric and met voters where they were. She might have given Trump a real fight. Instead, she was a puppet of a failing administration, and the electorate wasn't fooled. The MSNBC crowd, meanwhile, keeps digging. Heilman's not the only one flailing. Maher and Brand have both called out the network's echo chamber. Brand's propagandist nutcrackery, line stings because it's true. MSNBC's so busy pushing narratives, they've lost touch with facts. Maher's takedowns aren't just entertainment, they are a warning. If the left keeps trotting out weak arguments, they'll keep getting shredded. The audience silence on his show wasn't just a win for Maher, it was a wake-up call for Democrats. Voters aren't confused or uninformed. They're fed up. The party's obsession with identity, legacy media, and intrusive tactics alienated the very people they needed. So where does this leave the Democrats? Opposition, for now, and maybe that's where they belong until they figure it out. Schiff, Moore, Newsom, they've got potential leaders, but the party's got to ditch the optics game and focus on what works: competence, vision, solutions. Harris's loss wasn't about sexism or racism, it was about a bad fit at a bad time. America is ready for a woman, just not her. Maher's right. The excuses are old, the playbook stale, and the voters aren't buying it. The question is whether the Democrats will learn from this or keep stumbling into Maher's arena, unprepared for the next reality check. For now, the receipts are in, and the verdict's clear. They lost because they deserved to.